my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel Springboard Thought. Today we're talking about House of Leaves. I'm doing or participating in a readathon with Sina from Beating Around the Books, who's orchestrated this. Tomorrow, Tuesday, is the first milestone of this project, in which we should be done roughly 100 pages. People are going their own rate, but it's nice to have like goal markers, basically. And so I have read up to page 96 or 97, and also all of the Whalestoe Attic papers, which I will get into later. I have to sort of summarize this before I can give my thoughts. This is a video in which I'm just basically going to be explaining my theories, what I think is happening, the themes that I've been able to spot, the motifs that are going on. I don't expect much of this to pan out, because using these themes to foreshadow a 700-page book, necessarily a lot of the things that I think are static are going to change. And it's very complex and deep anyway, so I may not even be scratching the relevant surface that I need to in order to see what's beneath anyway. So we'll see. But I am very much enjoying this book. I got completely lost into it. I think I spent 6 hours on this book. For context, it usually takes me maybe an hour to get through 50 pages in a book. It took me 3 hours to read 56 pages. And then when you get to page 74, 75, there's a footnote in which it takes you to the Whalestoe letter diaries. And then that's another, I don't know, probably like 50, 60 pages. I didn't count. And then you go back to the text, and I read up to page 96, 97, the end of chapter 7. So, yeah, I'm reading it very slowly, very methodically. As you can see, I'm tabbing things. There's themes, motifs. Green is for questions. Pink is for, or not pink, but orange is for sort of revelations. B is declarative statements, or blue, I should say, not B. So yeah, I'm doing my best to interact with the book in the manner in which I think it assumes you're going to, basically. There's a note saying that, you know, you're basically invited to draw on the margins and stuff in every single page of this. I'm underlining, I'm Googling the translations of things, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So where I sit, here's an overview of what I can perceive. So within this fiction, we learn from a man named Johnny Truant, who in this book, it is published ostensibly by Johnny Truant, which is a false name for sure, we learn. And here it says that it is a book by Zampano, with introduction into notes by Johnny Truant, except these notes are extensive intrusions into the book. But the bulk of the book by Zampano is about a film that may or may not exist. It's a cult phenomenon. Ostensibly, he has viewed this film because he is explaining it in exceptionally granular detail in an academic lens, which is subverted in its readability, basically. He goes into digressions, he goes off tangents. It is not formulated like an academic paper. It merely is a simulacrum of it. It resembles it, but it is not even attempting to structure itself like one. There is no thesis with supporting arguments. It is more or less actually compositing the film for the reader in a way that makes it so that you are experiencing the actual film. That's how granular it gets. And so for me, actually, I don't even think it's different than viewing a film, really. It's more like you're experiencing time dilation in only the way that a text can do, where it slows down everything, unpacks things. It goes into, like I said, digressions of other papers on this actual film as well. And then it expounds on certain properties in order for you to understand what's happening in the film. There's digressions into mythology. There's digressions into physics, ostensibly. I didn't actually check to see if the physics was real, but it seemed believable to me. and that was in the manner in which humans process echoes and sound. And it goes into the theory of the uncanny, which is basically not a home. It is the Heilig, something like that. A German term which is unpacked, meaning many different things. And actually, I thought it was kind of fascinating because one of the first manners in which you can translate the word, apparently, was a word that, if you know Blade Runner 2049, it is one of the words that is repeated in Pale Fire from Nabokov. And that process in Blade Runner 2049 is for verifying that a human is or that a replicant is performing a baseline test. And so Pale Fire has other implications. Obviously, this is not referencing 2049 because it wasn't even out when it came out. But the theme is actually quite interesting. But if we accept the premise that the uncanny is something that we is sort of at war with the mundane and the home, then this book becomes quite interesting, because in the film, Navidson and his wife Karen they just bought the house, they are settling in, they're forming their own little nuclear family, they have a daughter, they have a son, and they're essentially, there's illusions all of the time that they're putting down roots, which is not a euphemism, but essentially it means that you're colonizing a place. That's where it comes from in etymology, if you go back long enough. It's when you plant crops, you are colonizing a place, and so that's why people say putting down roots when they're making home, etc. So they have this house, they are inhabiting it, and the house, as I see it, is inhabiting them as well, but I'll go into that. The story very much parallels Paranormal Activity, because he ends up setting up these high-8 cameras all around the premises, and they're always recording. The family are given personal, like, diary type ones where they can go into it, and the purpose of the film at the beginning is to just record a sort of slice of life in which they are chronicling how a family becomes nested into a house, basically, how they settle. And then it becomes something much different. The family goes away on vacation, they come back, the house has been altered. It's not a robbery, but the actual foundational aspects of the house, in which, like, the structure looks the same, but the interior has new rooms and has been altered and whatnot. And this only becomes more accented as it goes on. The house further changes. Navidson becomes obsessed with the fact that the actual dimensions of the house from the exterior and the interior don't match. And he becomes more obsessed with that. It becomes a journey. And his previous working relationship is as a photographer and as an explorer. He finds himself as he defines himself as something of almost like a Everest type person. Like, he's seeking out these new opportunities, he's going into dangerous situations, and he's sort of well regarded within his field for taking, leaps. He'd be like the war photographer type deal, except he's more concerned with nature, it seems like. So he is giving up his normal relationship in which he is away from his family to not do that. And Karen has been struggling with the kids, and her own relationship with Navidson is, I would say, very fraught. And so there's sort of, not ditch effort, but a significant change in their lives to meet each other halfway and make the relationship work, basically. And a hallway develops in the house. They don't know how. Essentially, they are doing their own thing, mother and father. One is playing the tarot cards, and he's in his, I think he's making a dollhouse in a workshop, and he hears the kids screaming, and the digression into echo becomes apparent because It's very uncanny and strange because they sound like they're coming from very far away when they know the dimensions of the house make it impossible. Navidson runs down a hallway and the kids are down there. He scoops them up and brings them back. Karen can't bring herself to enter the hallway because it is triggering her claustrophobia, in which there's a very significant digression into her having developed claustrophobia from dying as a child. Essentially, she had a very traumatic experience and she can't handle claustrophobic spaces whatsoever. So she can't actually participate in helping the kids at that time. As things go on, the hallway deepens and changes, and it becomes clear that there's something down the hallway more so than just a hallway, basically. And there's a lot of internal strife with the family between Karen and Navidson. Navidson, of course, as the explorer archetype, wants to go into this place and discover what the hell is going on. Karen draws her foot in the sand, saying that he cannot go, and if he does, then the marriage is essentially over. They fight about it, and he sleeps on the couch, and he gets really angry, and he goes in anyway and discovers a liminal space, which seems completely fathomless, and he almost gets completely lost. There's like a white space in which there's like an arc, there's I think a spiral staircase, lots of different hallways. He'll turn around, the place will have changed. It's sort of like uncanny in a the Lost Key room from sci-fi, kind of like this. And so he keeps discovering all these new rooms and stuff, and then eventually is like, I'm lost. He does find his way out only because his daughter is at the actual entrance calling out for him, and things only get stranger from here. So why this is so terrifying for me, at least in the beginning, was, like I said, it very much tries to replicate the exact kind of cultish circumstances in which Paranormal Activity tried to market itself as. When it first came out here, it's a similar situation in which a couple move into a house and they set up cameras and a supernatural entity starts haunting them, and they're trying to figure out why. They keep being terrorized with it, and the normal mundane circumstances of life become terrifying because things like the sound of a dishwasher, the opening and closing of a door, the swishing of a curtain, all of that stuff becomes clues as to a supernatural presence, instead of just being completely discarded with normal day life. And the movie has its almost Borges-like quality where it's time-stamped and date-stamped, clearly edited and stuff, but the cult status it was ascribed is because you could download the movie before it came out in the theater on purpose. There was multiple different endings, it was remixed, it was changed, and so when you talked about it with your friends, each of you would have a different experience, and it kind of made it more scary, basically. And then also just the fact that you were watching found footage. I never saw the Blair Witch Project, so I never got desensitized to found footage. And then also, the Blair Witch Project, had like the hurl properties where the camera shaking and stuff like that, whereas this is mounted cameras and looked kind of professional, and therefore lent it enough credence that it seemed plausible, or something like that. Like something like that could happen in your house, and so it made your own place scary. And so that's like this, at the time, that was like the scariest movie that I had ever seen, and it is very smart for a cult horror movie, ostensibly anyway, as far as I know from reading this so far, to evoke the same property as Paranormal Activity, because that also was a cult phenomenon. And if you have any associations with that film, especially if you were scared by it, then it immediately comes to the forefront in your mind. And so yeah, I was definitely freaked out reading this book at first. As it gets more into it, I'm less afraid of the actual fiction because I'm approaching it at a more meta aspect. But I was super freaked out about this up until, like the 56 pages or whatever. Now, things get even more strange. The footnotes have Johnny Truant's notes, as it says, right? It also has him ostensibly providing us true information about this film. And the fun thing about it is another Borges type way. Some of this is fictional, some of it is real. So at a sort of layer 0 level, if you wanted to think about these different intertextuality properties as different layers, layer 0 could be the true things that exist in our actual world. But even that could be fictional too, right? It could be referring to something that exists here and now. But if you actually read the thing, maybe it doesn't even pertain to what he's talking about anyway. You'd have to do a lot of research, and I'm not interested in that. But so there's that layer, and then there's the completely fictional fabrication of certain references. But then those references will sometimes be expounded on, explaining what happens within the reference. Otherwise, it would be completely useless and only used as sort of buttressing, right? It's there to make you feel like this is not fiction, it is reality. There's some credence to at least some of this, so you can't discount it completely. And so I think it's really fun that it has all of these like different digressions. For instance, when it goes into Karen's claustrophobia, it is a reference to a paper that somebody wrote having seen this film that many believe doesn't even exist. And if it does exist, certainly it's fictional. And then there's a subset of it that believe it's completely real, right? And it seems like the person writing the paper, Zampano, does believe it's real, at least so far. And so an interesting thing too is that we could almost put the film properties as you're consuming the granular details of what is happening in the film at layer 0 as well, because you're experiencing it in your head as if it was a real reference as well. I think there's very little difference for me as somebody with a very vivid mind's eye, and for the lack of sound essentially placed into the film to be experiencing this film via written word versus on the actual television. I'm seeing and hearing as much as I probably would be otherwise, and it's more has a more verifiable purpose in my own mind because it is self-generated, right? So I really am just tickled about the meta aspects of this in general. But then Johnny Truant has said at the beginning of this book that he and his friend found Zampano dead under very suspicious circumstances to them. There's something like occulty and strange happening. He was clawing, I think, at the ground, making possibly symbols, but to the medics it just looked like he had a heart attack and it was completely normal. Before the medics were called by them, they found a trunk, I believe, which is this manuscript. He took it and he has been assembling it and going into his work. There's a warning that Zampano has imparted to Johnny Truant or anyone who finds the trunk that they should discard this and not pursue it, and they'd be better off for it, basically. Truant can't do that. He gets lost into the words. So within the footnotes, sometimes you will get an editor's digression in the footnotes as well. That is lending credence to Truant's story, which I'll get into, saying that from his point of view, Truant has imparted these specific words and he's just correcting them, sort of like an editor in a comic book magazine. One of those digressions is to go to the Whalestoe letters, which expounds on Johnny Truant because his mother was writing him these letters, and it's all about that story. So the Johnny Truant story, which exists solely in the footnotes, at least for now, is about a looking like a troubled sort of younger 20-year-old guy who is very smart and a capable storyteller. He's very like erudite in his language and his diction. It's very eclectic. He often uses very colloquial words that are not colloquial to him, which is sometimes strange, but I'll get into that later. And he randomly seems to springboard thought off of whatever is happening in the fiction. For instance, if there's something that is like not lining up, if there's something mentioned that is completely untrue, Johnny will sometimes intrude into the narrative, and it will always be like pages and pages of a very specific thing. We know, for instance, that he works at a tattoo shop. We know that he is completely obsessed with a stripper named Thumper, and we know that, well, he has named her Thumper. Her actual name is not Thumper. He calls her that because she has a tattoo in her nethers that is a white rabbit, and it reminds him of Bambi. His boss is ostensibly a dick, and he routinely seems to only be engaging in debauchery. He's doing drugs, he's doing alcohol, he keeps trying to sleep with people. He's very inelegant in his lifestyle choices, I would say. He's probably not impoverished, but only living above it slightly. He's completely obsessed with the book, and he thinks that it's basically haunting him. And he talks about sex a lot, actually. It's quite annoying. So that's why it seems like he's a younger guy to me. He, as much as he is obsessed with Thumper, can't bring himself to actually speak to her, which seems weird. Eventually, we get to a point where he does. She gives him a beeper number. He beeps her, and she never calls him back. And that is sort of a splinter in his mind, basically. He routinely goes into these spirals where he has admitted in the fiction where he says that a story is basically something that hides the truth and is used as an escapism basically for him. And he says that he realizes this and can see something lurking on the peripheral, and that all of this is something that he can't see just beyond the horizon type of deal. And so we know something dark is happening with him. And then when we go to the Whalestoe letters, we learn that his mother is mentally ill, ostensibly diagnosed with schizophrenia. There's a lot of stuff going on with that, but we know she is exceptionally academically minded. She keeps telling him at a young age, it chronicles him from age 11, I think, to onward. We find out his last name, Truant, comes from him being truant at school. Makes sense. We find out that his mother's last name, when translated, I won't give it away here because spoilers, roughly translate to hair, and so you can see the parallel between Thumper and his mother. Maybe there's a Freudian thing where he's completely obsessed with finding someone who's like his mother, but has no real way of interacting with this stripper named Thumper. He is continually told that words are power. He is from a long line of, on his mother's side actually, sort of divine. She describes him as a depository of light. Wherever light is, he's kind of like sucking it up, and he's given sort of angelic qualities. He's also told that he is a descendant kind of Mars, which is the god of war. And so when he sort of acts up in his childhood, she is told about it from the director of the institute, and then she recontextualizes his actual life as these heroic sort of stories where he is battling his opponents and he is godlike, and she continually tells him to use words instead, but understands that within his like sort of beating heart there's this warrior mentality that he needs to curb, but also can't be condemned for as well. So then we also learn that she is hospitalized because she is, so here's some particular spoilers. If you don't want to know spoilers from now on, yeah, I think I have to be completely spoiler filled now and go beyond just the broad strokes. So first, let's digress back to Johnny. Johnny, his chapter sort of, or his last footnote that is very big, ends on him having a very strange supernatural event, or surrealistic basically, in which he the light goes out in a room where he is building needles at the shop, and this sort of triggers him. He has a trauma response, and he stubs his toe, and he freaks out. He thinks that he's actually like messed himself, like he's peed his pants, he's shat himself. He's completely terrified. But when people come to check on him, when they hear all this stuff, they find that the only thing that he actually did was stub his toe, and he's completely fine, except for at the back of his neck there are blood marks of half moons, I think it said it was. So that's the only thing that is real within that fiction. However, from the Whalestoe letters, we learn that the mother has told him that she places all of her love in his toe, and that wherever she needs to find him, or he needs to find her, he can sort of look for her there, in a way saying that like he should sort of kill himself off and not think of his mother and his father who died in by a drunk driver accident. He should kill himself off, be reborn, and go with this new family. And we see him going through many different foster families and stuff like that. But the toe is quite telling. The trauma response of him stubbing his toe, it feels like he has really internalized that particular letter from his mother, at least I think so. So when he stubs his toe, automatically that is the trauma response of a very specific moment. The mother describes her having gone to this institute because she strangled him and almost killed him, and he came away with half moon marks on the back of his neck. And she also reveals that she burned him by accident. We don't know for sure. In the kitchen, he has these significant burn marks on his arms, and he goes into at one point a very long story about how he got them, though he says that he's lying about how he got them. He changes it every time. This is the progenitor of that. And so we learn where he sort of gets his escapism and his propensity to dress things up in written word rather than confront them and obviously deal with his trauma. So he has a trauma response from hitting his toe, which is where his mother lives, essentially. And then what's up with the neck, right? Is it psychosomatic? Is it, like some people suggested in the group that maybe he clawed his neck, but he describes himself as holding the needles in a hand is the only problem. So I don't know how he would do that. Maybe with one hand, but he describes himself as disassociating and then walking out of the room. So it seems unlikely, and then he falls, right, stubs his toe, etc. So it seems unlikely, but who knows. Then we also learn that she has taken her own life, and she hung herself, I believe. And so he obviously has some internalized guilt about this. Then when we go back to Truant, we have all this additional information to recontextualize what he is saying. And we have a additional layer from which to work, because there's a lot of themes being worked into this book surrounding trauma. Johnny has some particular trauma. It's tied to a physicality with him. And in the actual, baseline of the fiction, the criticism in the book, there is trauma that we don't know so much about with Davidson, but Karen has her she also died similarly, exactly like Truant, reborn, and she has a trauma response that protects her when things get like that. So it's very interesting to me. Then we have this theme, I think, of colonization, where these people set down roots, and what ends up happening is the internal world, I think, again, of Navidson is what the maze or the labyrinth, the thing that he finds through the hallway in the interior, a place in which Karen cannot intrude or enter because of her own trauma. And it seems more or less so far, I'm only 100 pages in, that this world and how it is entered and reworked and interplayed with and stuff more or less reflects Navidson's actual thought process and his feelings and his thoughts and whatnot. So it does feel like, for me, it's so far a reflection of Navidson. It might even be his trauma. The house is described at first as a completely normal house. They colonize it, they plant their belongings, they settle into it, and the house actually grows. And what I think that means is that it accommodates literally his internal world, maybe both of them, I don't know. It could be both of their traumas interplayed there or something. But I think that it is very key that the fictions in all of these are literalizing very specific concepts like trauma and like bringing a physicality to it, right? So if the house is making space for Navidson in particular, it's also making space for his trauma. It is alluded to that there is a very disastrous thing coming, and that the only one who survives, the only one who can plumb the depths of the house when they in the maze basically is Navidson. He's the only one with the skills as an explorer, as his sort of the qualities that he possesses and his trauma essentially are the thing that gives him agency to explore the place. And so it makes sense if he was the only one that could do the work of going into himself and unpacking whatever is happening in there, whether it's his trauma or his internal world or whatever it is. I think it's key that Navidson is the one that survives and is able to succeed at this particular task and nobody else can. And then we also get the idea that Zampano was colonized by his own work, basically. He made this document that he became so embroiled with, so obsessed with, that it was his mind, like language as virus, basically. He was subsumed by his own work. And he was obsessed with apparently bringing in random people to read to him because he was blind. He put in random photographers' credits, some of which are real, some of which are not. And so we get this idea that there's a darkness lurking, and there's two ideas that I have of this. For one, it could be a literalization of foreshadowing, foregrounding actual shadow when foreshadowing occurs in the actual story, which I've noticed 2 or 3 times I've tabbed. Or it could be, the darkness or whatever could be actually a literalization of trauma. Because each of them had it, each of them were experiencing it, each of them are using story to obfuscate dealing with trauma. And so if in the processing of Zampano's work, Johnny Truant was also colonized, it makes a lot of sense why he's similarly feeling like he is a haunted person by, just as Zampano seems to have alluded to in the notes of, like, don't put this together, it could be bad for you, etc. I also think that there is an additional meta component of this where this could be a story about Storycraft itself. There's something that I recall that I refuse to Google now because it might elucidate what's happening with this book, and I'd rather just find out organically. There's a writing exercise for a character development tool where you create a house, and I believe you this throughout the story. Essentially, you are showing the reader different rooms in the house, but there is a room at the center of the house, a locked room, sometimes it's called the dark room, where the central meat and motivation, psychology of the character is never found, and it is never able to be found by the character or the reader. It is simply the thing of which the character navigates around all of the time, and so you only get glimpses of it, right? Like a shadow, basically. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff about that. If the house is actually just the exercise of creating Davidson as an actual character, that could be cool. And if so, who is creating them? Zampano or Johnny, right? Or is all of this Johnny? Or is all of this, fictional? So what is true, what is not? And what does it matter, really, right? Like, what is in the liminal spaces where we'll find the most interesting things? The answers aren't important. The questions are the things that we come to, I think, or at least what draw me. And so finally, the last thing I want to talk about too is in mentioning that his mother viewed him as a depository of light. When he falls, he feels like he is completely disappearing, because we find out he spills ink on himself, blackness, inky blackness, which subsumes him, basically. He feels himself completely going, which maybe he's being consumed by a story even then, right? Like, what is ink to him? We don't know. But it also could be that if he has internalized this notion that he is light itself, darkness could be destroying him. And the way that he doesn't disappear from the world / probably have like a mental break is there's also purple splattered onto him as well, and he describes that as contrast, and so that he believes himself to be real now. And when his mother was institutionalized, it was said that she had a broken fingernails that were needing to be filed down, and they were also purple. So I don't think, maybe there's no connection there, but purple might become an important color in the work. I'm not sure. And so I think those are my predominant thoughts. I have a whole bunch of other sort of tangential ideas, but I'm sure this is running long already. I'm very excited for this book. I would be surprised if it doesn't end up as a 5-star read. It would have to sort of fumble for it to do so, because I'm having a lot of fun just diving into it, reading it very slowly, Googling things, translating things. There's Old English, there's Greek, there's a whole bunch of different languages going on. And yeah, there's just a lot of things to unpack. If you want to go down on like a scavenger hunt, you can do that. There's a glossary, there's an appendix, you can tackle it however you want. My reading is linearly right now, so I'm just reading it straight through. But when the footnotes send me to a place, I go there and consume it, except for if it's a chapter. There's been one instance where it says more on this in chapter 9 or something, and I'm not doing that. If I ever read it again, I'll probably do that, where I am not so concerned with consuming it in a straight manner. But I figure for your first reading, if you want to have a linear progression, this is the time to do it. You'll never be able to do it again, right? So yeah, I think that's about it. If you're partaking in the readathon too, I'd love to know what you think about my ideas, and if you've read it before, please don't spoil it for me, but interact with me in any way that you would like. We are going to be finishing it the mid-January, I think, or maybe the 3rd week in January, because if it's 100 pages a week and 700 pages, stands to reason it'll be 7 weeks. And so you have a lot of time to come in. I'll post the announcement, which I believe has the Discord in it as well. You can catch up at your leisure and talk about it on the Discord. I'd love to hear more people's opinions and thoughts and analysis and wild theories like me. Anyway, I will see you next video. Bye.